All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get started. Uh, um, Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday afternoon. I know that's kind of a weird time, but I really appreciate you being here and showing up for yourselves. So today's session is just going to be a Q&A. We're going to do that for about an hour, which is not enough time. So I'm going to start us off with a question here in a moment. But as I said last night, if you attended that reading, we do this for students. This is your event. This is your Q&A session to have, one-on-one contact officially with a living, working artist because we want you to be in dialogue with artists in our community. So I'll start us off with a question, and then if you will drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on those, try to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. Do ask that you remain muted. Uh, that just helps us limit a little bit of chaos. So anything that you want to share, any questions you want to ask, please drop that in the chat. If you are able, no pressure, but if you are able, we'd love for you to turn your cameras on. Uh, um, that just helps us feel like we are more in a community space. And it is sometimes kind of a bummer to talk to see a bunch of blank screens. Uh, um, Again, there's no pressure. I know sometimes that just doesn't feel good to look at an image of yourself, but if you can, I'd love to see your face. So I am going to read Jerome's bio, and then we're just going to jump into the Q&A. So Jjjerome Ellis, who uses any pronoun, is a disabled Grenadian, Jamaican, American artist, surfer, and person who stutters. The artist works across music, performance, writing, video, and photography. Jjjerome has the great privilege of being married to poet ecologist Louisa Black Ellis. They live in a monastery on a creek in traditional Chesapeake and Nansemond territory. Jjjerome dreams of building a sonic bathhouse. All right. So I think I want to open this up with a question that's really been, I don't want to say weighing on me, but I've kind of been mulling it over. Those of us who are coming out of MFA programs, we have been trained, for lack of a better word, to focus our poems, to focus our collections. And anytime we're getting outside the bounds of whatever we decide our central themes are, we quickly have these limitations put on us to get back in our lane, basically. So obviously your collection does not play by those rules, which was so delightful. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about your decision, your freedom to blend music, navigating the stutter, ancestral histories, the natural world as it was ritualized by your ancestors. Yeah, if you could just talk to us about the blending of all of those ideas.
Yes, thank you so much, AR, and thank you all for inviting me today and welcoming me. It's really good to be here with all y'all. Um, yeah, thank you so much for the question. It's wonderful, and yeah, I feel so much of that pressure that you're talking about, AR, that the pressure um to focus or limit or to contain
Yeah.
or to stay in a certain lane. And I yeah, I feel it in general with writing and including when making this book. um and I think one thing that, like, encourages me in trying to just trying to like be aware of that and try um and giving myself a, a permission to not always follow that sort of ap approach. I think something that encourages me is asking um why I feel that way. Like why do I feel this pressure? As you observed, um that could be something that is taught in certain MFA programs. And I think for me a source of it is the the ways that different ways that capitalism um shapes the shapes how I feel as an artist in the world that I think of a part of the pressure that I feel to restrict myself to a certain theme or um, lane again is in part a pressure to like have like a coherent um, brand, a coherent
Yeah.
product or commodity that can then be legible and easily taken up into a certain marketplace. Um, and I see that manifesting in in the practices that that go into selling books and
Hmm.
other uh, uh, creative works like blurbs and copy about the books. And I'm very grateful for the labor of all the people at Milkweed and all the people who very generously wrote blurbs for the book and all the people who work with the marketing and all of that. Like I'm super grateful for that. Um, and I think something that I try to remind myself um is that is that is that I don't is that as the author, it's not like I can choose like I don't have to um operate by certain market logics, for lack of a better word. Um, that like the marketing people and team that is like their job, and I'm very grateful for their labor. Um, but I don't necessarily have to worry about how the book is to be marketed, worry about how it is to be even understood. I think there are other things that I'm interested in writing. I'm 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 interested in being legible and and I'm interested in someone being able to articulate what a book is about in quotes, but I'm also equally interested in being illegible and incoherent and and um and I'm interested in developing other relationships with meaning. I think often of this quote by the poet Fred Moten, who's a big inspiration for me, and he has this interview I think where he's reflecting on the word mess and messy, um, and it's really inspiring for me because I often feel that my work is messy, and that feels like a pejorative when I hear that in my brain.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like something that is inherently negative. But he talks in this interview, he talks about when he was growing up in Arkansas, and there would be people selling produce out of trucks. And sometimes someone would come up and ask for a mess of beans, for example, or a mess of corn. And the way they were using mess was as a unit of 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 measurement that had a precision and a specificity um, of its own, you know. And I just like to remind myself of that, and it really helps me to just shift my perspective a bit. Um, that maybe my like what I've created feels messy. Maybe that's not a problem. Um, um, someone last night, I can't remember. Oh, it was Stephen, I think, used the word, hey Stephen, used the word chaotic last night, and I think that's such a beautiful word. And I often feel, yeah, like similarly, like, oh, my what I'm creating is chaotic, and I feel it in a negative way. So I appreciated what that you offered, like a positive spin on it, Stephen. And I like that word too, because of course it has this, it has this dimension to it, um, of like the universe, like the role that chaos plays in just nature. Um, and it's not again, that's not necessarily a negative thing. And one last thing I think of too is there's mess, there's chaos. Sometimes I also feel like, oh, my you know m- like you use this word AR focus. I often feel like my work is unfocused, it's scattered, and I myself feel like scatterbrained a lot of the time. And it again helps me to think of scattering like when you scatter seeds. My
Mhm.
wife Louise and we just sowed some flax seeds the other day, and on the little seed packet, it said just scatter them. And I am grateful whenever I'm reminded that scattering again is not something inherently negative, that there are different methods of sowing seeds. One, sometimes you sow seeds in rows for a reason, and sometimes you scatter seeds for another reason. So it's all this is to say that there are like certain things there are certain words that feel very loaded negatively for me, and that I think reflect, yeah, messages that I receive and structures that I live in. Um, and I have little ways of trying to reframe, reframe these things, which is things that I've also learned in therapy too, is like how
Yeah.
to be aware of the thoughts that I'm having, and how to maybe reframe or speak back to those thoughts. So yeah,
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's such a good reminder. Those of us who are or who wish to go through the publication process, that creating the brand, creating that kind of cohesion, that's just not our job. That's someone
yeah,
else's job, and we don't
yeah,
have to worry about that. Um, and I think we put that pressure, the writer puts that pressure on themselves, and we can just let go of that.
yeah. I think so too. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something that to me is it's like I'm someone who really likes to work solo.
Hmm.
Um, but something I often have to remind myself is like that I don't have to do everything myself. Like I like to do things myself. Um, but and I sometimes struggle to ask for help, or struggle to let something be someone else's job, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Um, got some questions piling in through the chat. So Alicia says, did the idea of connecting your stutter to nature come right away, or did you have to accept this idea over time?
Oh yes, thank you, Alicia. Yeah, it was definitely very gradual over time. Um, as a child, I think like, and I think part of what has come over time slowly is too is even being able to put language to this connection because I think I have felt a connection between my stutter and nature since I was a child, but I didn't know how to articulate it. But but as a child, I really loved to spend time alone with nature, with animals especially. And I think part of why I liked that was because I could hang out with them, hang out with the crickets and the trees without having to speak, you know, because speaking as a way of connecting with other people has always been very fraught, and it takes a lot of energy. And even though I have a much more um, positive relationship with my stutter nowadays, um, it's still the stutter still imposes certain forms of labor in speaking. And so I loved that when I was hanging out with a dog, you know, I didn't have to say anything, but we could, you know, we could commune. And even if I did speak, I usually um my stutter didn't feel nearly as much of a challenge when I was speaking to an animal. I think partly because I was less afraid of being interrupted or
Yeah.
judged or mocked, you know. Like this dog is just gonna be here as I stutter, and that's all good, you know. So it was only so I think I felt that for a very long time, a solace in nature. Um, but yeah, it's taken many years to be able to articulate that and then to like yeah write and think about it more explicitly. And and yeah, I think I've just learned, and I continue to learn so much about like what I think what I was talking a bit about last night, just like the 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 entanglements of ableism, say, and violence against the environment, you know, and and racism and misogyny and you know so many different structures of oppression and domination, you know, as I've gotten older, I've learned about those structures and how to identify them and the ways that they are entangled. And so as I learned about ableism and how to recognize um the ways that that ableism impacts people who stutter and and other people who identify as disabled. At the same time, I was learning more about, you know, just uh, uh, the all the many forms of violence taken against the environment, and uh, yeah, was able to see just connections there. Like one thing I think about is again learning from Louisa as an ecologist. She teaches me about ecology, and I like to think about v what you might call like a vocal ecology. Um, everybody's voices and the and all the different ways everybody speaks as being part of ecosystems. And for me, stuttering and other forms of what sometimes called disfluency or disabled speech, like aphasia or Tourette's or lisping, there are different ways in which these forms of speech are, marginalized, are suppressed, are ignored, are sought to be eradicated. And so I think of though of that of those dynamics in relation with practices of conservation in ecology, and I'm interested in all the ways that disabled speakers um, conserve and protect, certain ways of speaking that are made more vulnerable. Um, yeah. So,
A few weeks ago, my students and I did an eco-poetics unit, and
mm,
and I think one of the conclusions we came to is that the line between ourselves and the thing we call the natural world is,
hmm
not as clear and harsh as we are
yeah,
taught to believe.
yeah,
Uh, so I hear a lot of that, like
hmm
collapse that boundary. Uh,
hmm
and I think that's a good lesson for all of us to, or a thing to start to pick at, a thing to start to undo.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of this story that I encountered, where I think there was like someone was leading a workshop and people were sitting outside and the leader said, ask the people to touch the earth. And so different people would reach out, touch the grass and touch a flower or go and touch a tree, and no one touched themselves. And I remember reading that and that having a really big impact on me, and it really helped me to exactly what you're saying, to like complicate this boundary and to then like see like the stutter. Like I often like just like envision the stutter as like a flower that grows out of my throat. And because I've also seen like I went to an ENT one time and they put this camera through my nose and showed me my vocal cords while I was speaking. So I was able to see my vocal cords while I was stuttering. It was really powerful. And I had never like seen my stutter in that way, and it was actually very very healing because it was like I was able to like see it in the way that I can see a flower, that it didn't feel like this thing that is sort of you know uh that it is as much a part of the earth as an animal or a plant, so
Wow, what a cool experience. Yeah,
yeah,
seeing inside the body is always wild. Uh,
yeah, it is.
all right, got lots more questions in the chat. So Michael's asking about the visual art and illustrations in Master of Ceremonies. Do you have a favorite media of art, such as painting, sketches, photography, sculptures?
Yes, thank you, Michael. um I think a favorite medium to look at, um, not necessarily make, but to look at, um, would maybe be movies. Um, I really love movies and TV too. And yeah, uh, and a favorite medium to work in, I would say visually, I would say probably photography. It's the visual medium that I've worked in, worked with the longest and played with the longest. Um, yeah, yeah, and I like experimenting with photography, especially working with film. That's like my
Yeah.
favorite way, working with photography. And I have this camera that my dad gave me when I was a child that he got in Japan um, before I was born. And it's such um, a treasure to have it. It's from like 1981. And I break everything that I own. So I'm very surprised that I haven't broken it yet. And I love to use it and it helps me feel connected to my dad. So yeah. Yeah.
Totally relate to that. I am also a breaker of things. Uh, um, okay, Destiny is asking, why did you choose the color purple for some of your text in Aster of Ceremonies? Is it your favorite color or is it just to stand out in a different way? She said
Mm.
she really likes it and purple is her favorite color.
Oh, thank you, Destiny. Yeah, I love purple too. A couple reasons. I one wanted to um I didn't want to use green um because of course often books that deal with plants use green and I wanted to go in a different direction and green is my favorite color. I wanted to go in a different direction. Um, there's a certain species of asters that grow here that their petals which are actually more flowers. The petals are purple, and so I and the asters that are on the cover, their petals are purple too. So I wanted to follow that. Purple is also a meaningful color um, for in my relationship with my wife. And the book, like I like started, I had like just started writing the book when we met. Um, and the book is very much guided by by so many things that she's taught me and just our relationship in general. So yeah, those are the main reasons. Yeah, I wanted to be guided by plants in general, but specifically by this certain species of aster that has the purple flowers.
Yeah, I like that word choice, guided by. I think
Mm,
he when we're putting together a collection specifically, I think again we try to just like fully impose ourselves on it. Uh,
mm,
but we need guides in that process and they can come through all different kinds of sources.
yeah.
Okay, so Cam is asking, really great question. Do you ever see your stuttering as a way of shaping time in poetry, similar
Mm,
to the way pauses and repetitions create rhythm in music?
mm. Yes, yes. Thank you, Kim. Um, I do. I do. And something I've been really something I've been I've been interested in doing is, I love poetry and I love reading it and one of the things I love about it is all the creative and imaginative ways that poets use space, both on the page and also when they are reciting and reading poetry, how the ways that they use silence and yeah, the spacing on the page. And so when I started writing poetry, I sort of I wrote poetry some as a child, and I stopped for many years, and I came back to it when I was in my 20s, and I gradually, after I came back to it, I was interested in exactly your question. Like I had noticed that stuttering shapes time, and that that poetry shapes time. And so I was interested in seeing like where these might meet. How might I like combine poetry and stuttering in the ways that they shape time. Um, and so I so um, so for example, there were some of the lines in Astor ceremonies. I spaced them based on um, when I had read the poems aloud to, for example, Chris Martin, who edited the book, and he would observe. He would say like, "Oh, you stuttered between these two words," and I would note that, and then I would make a space in between those words, or like a line break in those words. And in that way, it's like the stutter becomes like a co-writer, you know, because I've never really been interested in in sort of like writing in specific, or I have been interested a little bit, but I mainly have not been interested in writing within certain forms like a sonnet or a sestina, things like that. I don't know why, but something I have been interested in is like seeing is letting the stutter create the the form. Um, and in that, letting the stutter create the rhythm, create the meter, create the line breaks, yeah, sort of following its rhythm. Um, yeah. So yeah.
I love that distinction because, one idea students come into creative writing classes with is that free verse or work not written in one of those received forms doesn't have a form.
Mm,
Uh, and so
mhm.
I think that's another way of approaching the idea that all poems have form,
Yeah.
and that form can come from a lot of different sources other than just these rules on syntax and stress and syllables. So thank you for reminding us of that. Um,
Thank you.
Let's see. So Olive has a question about redefining things. They say, I really like your approach to redefinition, treating both words and the limitation of literary work as fluid and changing things.
Mm,
There are other literary or artistic works that inspired you to take this sort of intentional ritual approach to redefining meaning, or
mm,
does it mainly derive from your own personal experience?
mm. Yes, thank you, Olive. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many influences and guides here too. One is so there's this quote that I read last night from a part of the book that reads the proper name of God is a list, and it's by this scholar Valentina Izmirlieva, and it's from a book that she wrote called All the Names of the Lord, and it's about um uh naming, like name intersections between naming practices and ritual and magic in certain forms of Christianity. And there's a Greek term that I encountered in the book called antonomasia, and it refers to ritual practices of naming and renaming, including talking about God or the divine. Um, uh, and I was so taken with that. I've always been interested in names and God, and names and relationships between names and God, and and like the Tetragrammaton, the the Jewish um, name of God that is um, in some practices is not is meant to not be said or not pronounced. There's a Muslim tradition where God has 99 names or 100 names, I think, 99 of which are known and the last of which is unknown. Um, so I've just been interested in how different religious and spiritual traditions approach this question, and the and what you said, Olive, like the redefinition and the ongoingness of naming. Like you know, I'm very fascinated by like nicknames, as like like the ways that we acquire and shed names as we go through life. That we redefine ourselves. Other people redefine us. My wife has nicknames for me that like are at practices where she redefines me in ways that I love. Um, so there's that book, and I think another yeah, again, Fred Moten, he in throughout his works, both his prose and his poetry, he does a lot of he does a lot of practices, I think, around redefining things and like um questioning and offering a lot of different perspectives on words that I upon first reading them I might think that I have a pretty good understanding of what they mean. Like freedom, for example. He writes very expansively and about freedom and raises so many questions about what it what it means. Um, so yeah, his work is so influential for me. And oh, and the scientist Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, she's taught me so much about for example, she has this essay called, I think it's called The Grammar of Animacy, where she talks about her experience studying the Potawatomi language, and she talks about how in the Potawatomi language, the majority of words are verbs. Um, and that she talks about how like in Potawatomi, a bay, like in English we would say that like there's a bay over there. She says in Potawatomi that you would say like something along the lines of it is baying, that there that the bay, the body of water, is communicated as a verb instead of a noun. Um, so that those lessons that she teaches about the ways that different languages define the world in different ways, and the ways that translation reveals these that the way that like a translation moving in between languages also produces redefinitions. Um, I find I find very I find very fruitful too. So there's lots of other ones, but yeah.
Have you ever read the very short Ursula K. Le Guin piece, She Unnames Them?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, you must. I'll drop that in the chat.
Please.
It's so short. It's like a page or two. Um,
Mm,
it's a retelling of the creation story of Adam
mm,
and Eve, and
mm,
um, so much happens in this short piece because
Mm,
like Kayla Gwen is Ursula K. Le Guin. But effectively, Eve unnames the animal
mm, mm.
after Adam names them uh,
Wow.
as
Mm,
an act of agency and autonomy, both for herself and the animals.
wow.
I know it's one of my favorite pieces of writing ever.
Okay.
I'll put that in the chat in just a second.
Yes.
So Divya says, I love the music inserts in your poems. As both a
Mm,
musician and a poet, where do
mm.
you find the line between poetry and songwriting, if there even is one?
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm just taking a note here. Um, who asked that again?
Divya.
Oh, thank you, Divya. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, hi. I find I love this question, and I love how blurry that line for me often is. Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is like um one thing that comes to mind is, well, Sasha West, who very kindly chose Astor ceremonies for the Balcones Prize. They wrote last night um, to me in an email, very kind, well wishes for the reading, and said that they were glad that the day would end in with that the yesterday would end with silence and song. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I found that so beautiful, and I love thinking of this silence, song, speech, chant as these different regions, if you will, of sound and the voice. And I think in I love how poetry to me is so hospitable to so many coordinates in those regions, that poetry like welcomes so many forms of silence, welcomes so many forms of song, welcomes so many forms of speech. And and for me, like what I what I learned from poetry is the role of the body in all of that. Um, the for probably most, if not all of the book, I read it out loud several times, different sections to different people and animals. There was a couple weeks where I would go to this. I would ride my bike to this beautiful marsh here in Norfolk, and where there was always a little yellow-crowned night heron. Um, if anyone is unfamiliar with what they look like, I'm just gonna I I'm just gonna put the Google image search link in the chat, and I highly recommend you take a
Awesome.
look at some point. They're just so adorable. They're like a foot tall, and they're so cute, and they migrate here in the warmer months, and they come in March, so they've just arrived, and it's so exciting every year when they arrive. But they would fish. There was always some f fishing every morning this March. I would bike there in the morning, and I would they would be fishing, and I would sit on this railing and just read some of the drafts of the poems out loud. in their presence. Um, so it was important for me to try to pass the text as much as possible through my body. And I'm stuttering throughout, and the stutter for me always exists on this sort of border between silence and speech. And then there was this song towards the end of the book that I sang last night where I would sing it over and over again while while walking. And it's exactly what you say, Divya, that the moment where I cross from speech into song, it's often very hard for me when dealing with poetry. It's often very hard for me to tell when I've crossed over. It's like when you're driving and you cross into a different state, but you don't realize it until you see that like the exit signs have changed. Like when I'm at like a coffee shop ordering my drink, I'm clearly not singing. Like I'm speaking my order here. But in dealing with poetry, it becomes much blurrier, and I quite love that. Um, and that's another reason why I'm so interested in in chanting too, as again like another blurry region in between these things. So yeah.
Thank you. Stephen asks, when you got started, was there a self sense of potential to become an artist or a writer, or did it come from a sense of purpose, uh, um, or like how did that arise? Was that organic? Was that like an objective you had?
Yeah. Who asked that again?
I was Stephen.
Stephen, yes. Thank you, Stephen. Um, I think it was there were sort of like I think like watershed moments. Like when I started playing the saxophone when I was 13, and I started studying jazz and learning about the history of jazz and different jazz musicians, I felt a strong sense of kinship with these musicians, with their music, but also like how they dressed and just sort of like how they moved through the world as Black people, especially moving through the United States. Um, and I think I yeah, I pretty quickly felt like a desire to become a musician and maybe a jazz musician, maybe because I felt, yeah, I felt that a calling to that, yeah, that way of being, and that way of relating to music and creativity. Um and but then I eventually um decided that it wasn't necessarily jazz that I wanted to be a jazz musician, but more just a musician. Um, and I focused on music for a long time. But I again am so scatterbrained, um, in a good way, that you know, I kept being interested in other medias, writing and performance and visual media. Um, and I think I feel very lucky. I think it's the result of many, many people quietly and loudly being supportive of me, just like following my nose and following my what's where I wanted to go creatively. Um, I think yeah, like teachers from elementary school onward, that yeah, that didn't like through their teaching, they instilled in me the confidence to yeah, to um feel a lot of freedom in creating. And I think especially they also made it very clear, again, when I was a child and in elementary school, that creativity is the is everyone's right. Um, that you don't have to, I didn't call myself an artist until I was an adult, but you know, they they didn't they didn't say that you have to like call yourself an artist in order to have access to making art. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, I feel very grateful to the teachers and to you, AR, for all you are doing to encourage that in your students.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I think again, I think we see writing in particular as such an isolated and isolating experience that we forget how important it is to have at least one person who's
Mm,
championing us,
right.
who's encouraging us to just move in the directions we feel called to. And
Yeah.
I think if that person isn't showing up organically, I think there are so many resources at ACC in the
Mm,
community to find that person who's just going to encourage you, who's going
yeah.
to give you permission.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, let's see. Sarah asks, do you, I think you write about this in Master of Ceremonies a little bit, but Sarah asked, do you have a specific flower you associate with your your stutter, and or one that associates with your soul?
Oh, yes. Thank you. It was Sarah who asked that?
Mhm.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Um, Goldenrod is usually my is usually the first to mind that I associate both with my stutter and with my soul. There's something about the way that they lean, and that they are sometimes treated as weeds. Um, and there's this like lush spray of all these tiny little flowers that I feel just so whenever I see them, I just love them. And here in Virginia, they only bloom in the fall. And I look forward to their blooming every year. They're yellow, and they just like make me so happy to look at. And their Latin name, Solidago, means has to do with healing and strengthening. And I really like that too, especially because I feel I feel that the plants have and ongoingly heal my relationship with my stutter, also just with my mind, with my body. Um, so I really connect with that aspect of their name. Um, I just think they're so beautiful. Yeah. And they're in the Astor family too. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I love how just like how multiple they are. Like there's just hundreds of little flowers and I just the multiplicity I feel very connected to.
That doesn't surprise me. Uh, I like how you talk about one of your attractions to them is the way they lean. And I
Hmm.
when we think of the natural world, specifically a flower, uh, humans are taught that plants and flowers like kind of even need to be performative for humans,
Yeah.
need to be perfect and upright. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
so I like embracing a plant that is not playing by those rules.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to ask a question from Selena that we kind of chatted a bit about last night. But if you could talk to us a little bit about the research process for astro ceremonies.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Selena. Yeah. Um, um, it it was so um again the result of a lot of generosity on the part of many people um to provide me access to s specifically these runaway slave advertisements that I because I first learned about them in April or May of 2020 and so I had to access everything uh, through the internet and through several databases of archivists and librarians who, for have put in so many hours scanning just thousands and thousands of newspaper pages. Um, there were some that were behind paywalls that a friend of mine at Columbia University just has shared their login with me for like 8 years. And so I use those and then also some free ones online. Um, and what I would often do is search if there was like a database function where you could search for a keyword, I would search stutter or stammer or impediment and as a way of finding which of these advertisements were specifically talking about um, enslaved ancestors who stuttered. And I worked primarily with ads from the UK and the US, and a bit with ads from Brazil. Though the Brazilian ones didn't end up in this book, they ended up in another book. Um, um, yeah, so it was mainly U.S., the UK, New York, South Carolina, um, London were probably the three locations that showed up the most in the advertise I was working with. And then I I consulted with several really generous people, including M. Bessie Phillip. I had a lot of I had an emotional breakdown towards pretty late on in the process of writing it. Um, um, for a number of reasons, including just like I was feeling a lot of confusion and um, a lot of confusion around just like ethical questions about writing about slavery and how to do it in an ethical way. And and so I had this very helpful phone call with the poet Eleanor Bessie Phillip, whose work is is like the primary um, um, inspiration and guide for this work. She was so generous with her time and helpful, and I also had a call with the scholar and historian Jennifer Morgan, who's also so generous with her time. Um, and I think there were probably one or two other. Oh, and also with the artist and poet Adjua Gargi and Zinga Greaves. Um, and those calls were I would still say research. They were more they were more like they like my questions for them were more about like emotional guidance, like how to navigate this material. Um, yeah, how to navigate this material safely and with care. So I'm so grateful to all of them. And oh, and then the plant side, I used primarily like floras, e- e- encyclopedias of plants. There's a flora for the North and South Carolina that I use for the really long prayer to the South Carolina plants late in the book, the flora of Virginia as well, and the flora of North America, which is available online. I also use some of the copies in print. Um, and those texts are such a beautiful antidote in many ways to these runaway slave advertisements. They're just like, thousands of pages with like extremely detailed information about plants. It's so beautiful. So I loved being able to engage with both archives.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that engaging with both archives was like a really symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that that comes through in
Hmm.
ceremonies. Well, my friends, we are at the hour. As we said last night, I think we could continue having this conversation all afternoon, but to honor everyone's time, I think I'm gonna call it there. Jerome, you were so generous enough last night to drop your email in the chat. I wonder if you might do that again, just in case you didn't get your question answered, or if you have additional questions. And I just want to extend a thank you for making yourself available like that to our students. That's really kind and invaluable. Uh, um,
Thank you. Yes, I just wrapped it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for spending time with us over the past couple of days. And I hope to keep these conversations going in one way or another. We will have these, both the reading last night and this conversation, we will have them up on our YouTube channel in the coming days or weeks. We'll let y'all know when those get up in case you want to revisit them or send them to other folks that you think might be interested in these conversations. So, um, students, if you're attending for one of your literary events, I'm really excited about reading those papers and learning what you got out of this, because I know that spending time with you really uh, enriched me, and just the kind of permission you've given yourself as a writer and artist has like, I'm getting emotional again, but has just like healed me in a kind of way.
Mm,
Thank you for that.
mm. Oh, thank you, AR, so much. Yeah, thank you for all your generosity and stewardship, and thank you to all of you for having me and for your very generous questions and listening. And yeah, I put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me if I didn't get to answer your question or if you have any questions or anything. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, I will see y'all soon, hopefully, and have a good afternoon.